nonprofit TAT Foundation was created in 1973 to bring spiritual seekers and finders together. We publish books, videos, and a free online newsletter. We maintain a website of spiritual resources and hold 4 spiritual retreat weekends each year. Our goal is to offer practical guidance for following a spiritual path and living a spiritual life. For more information, go to tatfoundation.org. That's tatfoundation.org. Since his spiritual breakthrough, Shawn has taken a wide multimedia approach to communicating about spirituality. And that includes poetry, essays, video production, and audio podcasts. And Shawn is currently working on a study of the teachings of Richard Rose, which I think makes Shawn the ideal person to share Rose's approach to the way, the life, and the truth. Now, we will be taking questions when we get time for that. Remember to keep your microphones muted, and we'll have a chance later on to put questions into the chat box. So let's start now with Shawn Nevins. Shawn?
Yeah, thanks. And I did want to mention before we get into the talk itself that Mike Gegenheimer and myself, we are working on a small book or booklet about Rose's teachings. Like you said, there's 5, 6, 7, 8 people who are new to TAT that I noticed on the schedule for this weekend as participants. So I think more and more something like that would be useful, considering that Rose has several books. And the Albigen system, the title of the book, Rose's first book, is telling us that, hey, I have a system and I'm presenting it to you. But if you had asked me at any point while I was actually living on Richard Rose's farm, what is the Albigen system, I would have struggled to figure out how to answer you. And to this day, I would say I can't lay out step by step what the Albigen system is, but I know from studying Rose's work and from my own path what I would call principles that are core to this Albigen system. And part of that is this idea of a threefold path. But I can assure you that when I showed up at Richard Rose's farm, intent on studying with the Zen Master, that he did not sit me down and say, here's the threefold path, which I would like for you to follow. And on day 1, I would like for you to do this. And there wasn't any kind of progression like that. But hopefully this talk will kind of begin to lay out Rose's idea of the threefold path by taking some quotes that he left about it and present to you an overview of the threefold path, and that the other 3 speakers today will delve into the specifics of this threefold path. And let me get my microphone off. There we go. So let me share my screen. There we go. And that you should be seeing a slide that says taking refuge in the threefold path. Once again, I'm going to look to Bo just to verify with a thumbs up. Yes, thank you, Bo. You're a good man. I appreciate it. So, taking refuge in the threefold path. And I like whoever came up with this title. I didn't come up with the title for this. I was just asked to present this. But I like this idea borrowed from the Buddhist teachings of taking refuge. And what did Rose actually say? This is from his book, the Albigen Papers, and I believe this is in the chapter called The First Steps. I recommend for those not otherwise addicted to embark upon a threefold path. I would explain the mechanism as a sort of troika, which is a three-wheeled cart. The vehicle being the individual, and the three powers that are pulling the vehicle with proportionate pace are the truth, the law of the contractor, meaning brotherhood, and the life of search. So those are the three pieces: truth, the law of the contractor, and the life of search. And what I in retrospect find interesting, but at the time I first read this, it didn't really catch my eye, but this idea that they're pulling the vehicle with a proportionate pace, meaning that we're attempting to apply all three of these portions, if you will, of the system, all three of these paths at once. And you can't just focus on one of them, which for me, my tendency would be that I would want to focus on meditation and reading, solitary pursuits like that. That would be where my strength is. I don't have any problem whatsoever sitting for an hour in meditation, but I have a lot of trouble seeking out other people, the law of the contractor or the brotherhood, that path. I have a lot of trouble with that path because I have a tendency towards introversion and being by myself. But he says that all three of those, we've got to work on all three of those. A little bit of background. I think perhaps it might be interesting to explore for a moment, like, where did Rose come up with this? Why did he settle on this idea of a threefold path? So again, I think I pulled this from the Albigen Papers. He talks about Christ, he talks about the Buddha, and he says that the blueprints left behind by both of those were threefold directives. And it's interesting to me that Rose was one of the things that I really admire about Rose is that he tried through his whole life to become a better teacher. And I think about myself, to what degree I try to be a teacher. He's an inspiration in that sense, because a teacher isn't just born. Someone can have an awakening, an enlightenment, a realization, and not have a clue as to what to say about it or how to help anyone whatsoever. And they may have no inspiration to do that either. But Rose, to me, drilled into his students this idea that once you have found anything to any degree, that it was incumbent upon you to reach out and help your fellows. And that's part, as we'll get into, that's part of this idea of the contractor's law and group work and the brotherhood. So he was looking at other systems. He was looking at other teachings, and he looked at Christ and the Buddha. And in John 14:6, he actually pulls out this quote from the Bible. Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. And in the Buddhist teachings, he had this quote that there was the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha represented the way of discernment. And the Dharma was the life of truth and duty. And the Sangha was the brotherhood. And they also looked at the teachings of Gurdjieff, who, if you don't know, Gurdjieff had a school which some people referred to as the Fourth Way School. And he was in the 20th century. He was probably one of the more famous teachers of esotericism. And Rose says, looking at Gurdjieff's teaching, that Gurdjieff was obviously aimed at helping people reach the truth. And Gurdjieff recommended a way, a method of observation, and he proposed working in a school so that people would gather together and work and help one another. And this is, as near as I can tell, this is at least part of the inspiration of Rose deciding on this idea of a threefold path. In his own life, I know that Rose sought out other teachers when he was seeking enlightenment. I know that he certainly had friends along the path. He had people that he shared information with, shared resources with. And of course, you have to think back in the 1930s and 40s when he was a seeker that there wasn't a whole lot of information. It was hard to come by. So it was perhaps even more of a struggle to find your fellows, find people that you could work with than it is today. So these are the origins, and like I said, other than in the Albigen system, the book, there's very little mention of the threefold path, and it wasn't something that Rose, at least when I was around him, wasn't something that he brought up with me or recommended that I do. But he certainly recommended pieces of the threefold path to me without necessarily labeling them as such. So you can, you might imagine that this next slide, this is a little piece of paper, which I know is small, and I don't intend you to be able to read it right now. But this is I think it was a 3-page piece of paper that I found in the old community building on Richard Rose's farm. There was a library there. And for months, if not a couple of years, one of my goals was to get Mr. Rose to unlock that library so that I could get in there and see what was in there, because I thought there must be all sorts of amazing esoteric books and resources hidden in Mr. Rose's library. But every time he would come up the hill to talk to me or see what was going on, he either wouldn't have the key with him, or he would start to get the key out of his pocket and then he would get distracted by something else and he would go off, and I just never could get him to unlock the library. And one day he actually left the key with me, and I was able to go in the library and I found this piece of paper. And this thing, if you can't read the title, this thing is called The Threefold Path, The Way, the Life, and the Truth, the Chart of the Detailed Steps. And I thought, aha, I found it. This is going to be the answer to all my questions about the spiritual search. And now that I've got this, I'm going to be enlightened in a few weeks or months because he's laid it all out for me. Yeah, not quite. It doesn't work quite like that. But this is an interesting resource, and it is really to me the most detail that Rose ever laid out of the threefold path. And you can find this thing online. It was actually published in a TAT forum issue. So if you just go to tatfoundation.org and you go to the TAT forum page, you'll find, just search for chart of the detailed steps, and you'll find this is there, or just go to Google and type in chart of the detailed steps, and you can look at it with your leisure. And some of the other speakers this weekend may talk about this as well. So what I hope to do now is delve into a little more detail on the threefold path, but mainly I hope to communicate to you again this idea of how the three pieces work together, and the importance of if you are inspired by this, or you do see parts of the threefold path in your own life, how you could perhaps strengthen some of the pieces that aren't your native interest or what you're natively drawn to, and you may find some benefit to that in your path. There's three, I'm calling these three formulations of the threefold path, but it's sometimes described in different ways. Obviously, we talked about the way, the life, and the truth. But Rose also mentioned the life of search, the law of the contractor, and the truth. That's another way he had of phrasing it. And then this last one is, this is the way that I thought about it. I think of the way as where your energy and your focus goes. And you know, the law of the contractor is group work. If you hang around TAT at all, you'll hear people talking about group work. And today there'll be some opportunities to break out into small groups and perhaps do some group work. And then the truth, which can be kind of this nebulous thing of, well, we're after the truth, we want the truth, we want to live a life of truth. I simply thought of that as honesty. Because to me, that's a real kind of a gut level, a very personal way of thinking about the truth, meaning that it's honesty. So looking at the way, the life of search, and this idea of where does our energy and our focus go. Rose, one thing that he did, was always emphasizing with me, was this idea of conserving energy and directing one's energy. And as some of you know, he talked about celibacy, practicing celibacy. He thought that that was a way to conserve one's energy. He had what I thought was, he's an extremely practical guy, and used analogies that were very down to earth. And he would talk about a house, and the student, the seeker, as being a house. And he would say that in that house, there's a lot of faucets, right? There's faucets in the bathroom, there's faucet in the kitchen, there's all these faucets. And just think, if you were to open up all the taps, all the faucets, and just let the water pour out, that the water pressure in any one of those faucets would be weak, because you're pulling on the full water pressure in the house by opening up whatever 10, 15 different faucets. And he said, now imagine if you turned off all the taps except one, and you open up that tap all the way. Well, now it has the potential, all the pressure, all the water pressure in the house can flow out that one faucet. And so that's, roughly the idea of conserving and directing one's energy. that we have a source of energy. We have perhaps a personal source and an impersonal source of energy, and our life, our attention is a way of focusing that. And typically, for most of us, myself included, on any given day, I've got 10 things that seem incredibly important that I'm trying to do, and my energy is very divided. And so I think that's why a lot of us, when we have the opportunity to spend some time alone, for example, and really focus, we find that refreshing, and we find that quite an experience, because we rarely have the opportunity to live like that. And he proposed consciously trying to live in that way. And as part of that, he said, implement a regular practice. And you may be picking up on the idea that he's not laying out a specific practice here. That he's giving you a principle, and he's asking you to find the practice. Perhaps you'll find something that he talks about of interest. Perhaps you'll find something in one of his books, but perhaps you'll find something from some other teacher or from your own inspiration, and that will be your practice. But you should have some sort of regular daily practice, and the idea being, of course, that we establish a habit. And we see this idea everywhere today, in any kind of self-improvement or human potential. The legion of podcasts out there, podcasters who are trying to get us to do more, be more, become what we want. They all talk about establishing a habit of excellence, habit of performance, whatever it may be, and the importance of that. And then I added going within as really another idea of practice. And going within is another one of those things that may seem incredibly vague at first, but if you think about it, in daily life, most of our attention is focused on the world around us, the exterior landscape. And imagine if we turn that focus around and looked at our interior landscape, the world within, and began to explore that world within with the same sort of curiosity that we have about, what is over the next hill, or what is the new store that just opened up in town, or what is my neighbor up to, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a little dip, if you will, into the way, the life of search. Now, what he called the life, or the law of the contractor, or group work. And this quote at the beginning is as much for myself as anyone else. The part of the path which is hardest to realize is that dealing with the brotherhood or school. And now the contractor's law, again, very practical idea, right? The contractor's law. Rose said he was a contractor himself for a period of time, and he said something to the effect of, well, no contractor would hire employees to help paint a house or build a house or pour concrete for a driveway. No one would hire employees if there wasn't some efficiency that was gained. And the efficiency is not necessarily just that, if you go from one person to two people, you can get the job done twice as fast. There's actually, just by working with, you've probably experienced this if you've ever exercised with someone else, or you've ever done any kind of hard task in a group, you can amplify each other's efforts. You can inspire one another. You can go a little harder, a little further, a little faster. It just keeps you interested. And that's his idea of people helping one another. And that feeds into the law of the ladder. And the law of the ladder says that it looks at all people, all of humanity really, and says that all of us are somewhere on a ladder of progression from, these are my words, let's say seeming ignorance or seeming lack of understanding to perhaps total understanding or realization or enlightenment. We're all somewhere on this ladder of progression, and it is helpful to us to, one, reach up to someone who's further along than we are and ask for help, beginning help from someone, as well as reach down to someone that we can help and that we're a little further along. And so you get the picture of humanity helping one another raise themselves up, progress. Which to me is a beautiful idea, and to me is an ideal of what we could be. One, as a group of seekers, and two, as a world of people. Now, some might say that this entire idea of paths and progression and so forth is ridiculous because we're all one and we're all already know all that we need to know and we're all already enlightened and so forth. And, that remains to be seen, to be discovered, to be known, not just in your head, but in your heart, in your gut, in your whole body, in your experience. And until the time that it's known in that way, in your bones, if you will, the reality, the seeming reality is that there is progression and that there are ways and that there are paths to the truth, and that it is of benefit to study those and practice those. And we are moving in a direction towards truth. And speaking of truth, the third part, if you will, of the threefold path is this idea of truth and honesty. And you'll see probably other speakers will talk about small t truth as a way to distinguish from capital T truth, and small t truth is generally talking about relative truth or daily truth. It ties in with self-honesty. It is, I think of it in this way, and it's probably why I use the word self-honesty. But if I think about myself, if I'm telling stories, for example, justifying why my boss is being unfair, rationalizing why it's okay for me to, keep a secret, or it's okay for me to tell a little lie because I don't really want to upset someone. All these little stories and reasonings that I tell myself, all of that stuff we begin to believe. The lies that we tell ourselves begin to become the truths that we believe about ourselves. And if you're living a life that's filled with little lies and little rationalizations, then that becomes who you are. You're not becoming a seeker of truth. You're becoming a storyteller. And that's not really the direction that's the most efficacious for finding this capital T truth. So it's good to going back to daily practice. It's good to have a daily practice of thinking about what happened that day and asking myself, was I being truthful today? Were there any little stories that I told? And if so, well, why? That's the interesting part. What was I defending? Why did I find it necessary to do that rather than say the truth? And that really feeds into capital T truth, especially if you're dancing around the idea that self, Bo may be an illusion, that Shawn may be an illusion. If you're beginning to explore that and explore the personality, and I'm just looking at who I see on the screen right now, Mary. What is the solidity of this thing which I believe in? If you're beginning to explore that realm, then believe me, self-honesty is a very important tool, a very important practice to have. Well, this is a long quote, but I am going to violate the PowerPoint suggestions for presenters, and I'm going to read through this. We can ask ourselves occasionally for a sort of progress report on how we are functioning and accomplishing on each of the 3 departments of effort. Principally, are we trying to live the truth? That's what I was just talking about. See the truth as opposed to human positivism and trying to become the truth. Secondly, are we following a way, a mental discipline of some sort besides just reading and studying all that we can on the data to date or relative material? Right? And note that, not just reading and studying. That can be an easy thing to default to and think that the truth is going to be in the next book, or I can't wait for the next author, the next new teacher that I'm going to read about and study. And thirdly, are we promoting parallel effort to work with others or to find others with whom we can join efforts? Now, it's not necessarily easy to find the people that we can work with. Just thinking about exercise analogy, if you're wanted to find somebody to run with, right? And you're just starting, you need to find somebody who's just starting or a little further ahead than you to work with on a regular basis. It's not going to do you a lot of good to run with a marathoner when you can only keep up with them for 10 or 15 minutes. But fortunately, especially with Zoom, and that we're all becoming much better at exploring these online options. For example, in the TAT Foundation website, you'll find a lot of local groups. You'll find Zoom groups. You'll find people that are getting together and working and joining efforts. And yeah, so if I haven't communicated yet how important I feel and how important I think Rose felt, and how he expressed that these three pieces fit together, right? And they build on each other. You know, your efforts with other people will help your individual daily practice, right? The things that you read, even, right? You've had the experience, I'm sure, of reading something, reading just a line in a book, and it catches you, stops your thinking, and for a moment, you're going within, and you're close. You feel close to something. You feel close to perhaps a capital T truth. And all of these things, they build and they reinforce one another. And Rose says, all of the above must be done simultaneously. We should not concentrate on personal affairs and forget the brotherhood, or forget the practice of truth. This is the second page from that chart of the detailed steps. And I bring it up because it's interesting to me that on that second page, there's a half of it is devoted to commitment. And I wanted to touch upon commitment just briefly. Rose said that each member should realize the significance of the word commitment. This makes an eternal spiral from the mundane to the absolute. And you know, that spiral, I think that spiral is in part illustrated by this idea of the threefold path, and the three pieces. It's people talk about a virtuous cycle, and they're part of a virtuous cycle, and that cycle is actually a spiral upward. And commitment, at the risk of too many analogies, commitment is like the glue for that, for the threefold path. I like this quote from Rose. He said, "Now all of the above advice involves no great arcane secrets, no magical formula. It could be used in any research laboratory or by any man building a shelter." And I do think that if you look around the world and you study systems of success, you study people who are successful, that you'll oftentimes you'll see how a threefold path, or pieces of the threefold path, how they are evidenced in that person's life. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. This next slide is kind of illustrates that. There was this show called Firefly, a little science fiction show that only lasted one season, and this was in the early 2000s, I think. And there was one particular episode where they had a quote: "When you can't run, you crawl. And when you can't crawl, when you can't do that, you find someone to carry you." And this quote has always stuck with me, and something I think of from time to time. Because to me, it has elements of all the pieces of the threefold path in it. It obviously is, it's woven with commitment. Because whoever was thinking about this quote, whoever came up with it, was feeling the commitment of someone who is on a path, someone who's trying to accomplish something, right? Can't run, right? They're running, they get to the point they can't run, and then they crawl. They get to the point where they can't even crawl, and they are willing to ask for help from someone to carry them. And then in my own life, there were definitely times on the path where I was just down and out, and if it wasn't for other people around who shared my interest, that who knows, I might have fallen by the wayside for any length of time. So there's an element of the brotherhood, the law of the contractor in this quote. There's a practice, if you will. In this case, it's just the movement, the running, the motion of the desire to get somewhere. And then there's a goal, right? The truth. There's a quest that is that's illustrated by this quote. Just a few thoughts on the application in everyday life of the threefold path. And this, I think this next point, or this next section of the PowerPoint is perhaps a little, jumps around a little bit. It's because it's just some thoughts of my own, some different quotes that I think illustrate some of the challenges of the threefold path. And just, maybe there's bits of advice in here, let's say. So this is a quote from Rose. All men are seekers, however, the degree of energy applied is the difference among them. And we might add that the amount of honest, intelligent study of ways and means also marks the difference. So we talked about energy earlier and the idea of focus, and here he's bringing it up. But ways and means, if you're not clear about that phrase, it's a common Rose expression, finding ways and means. And he's talking about those daily practices. What are you going to do on a daily basis besides reading and studying all the material that you can get your hands on? What are you going to do? And this is extremely individualized. If you read Rose's pamphlet on meditation, it is not a step-by-step guide for how to meditate, but again, it's a set of principles for how to develop your own way of meditation. And tying back to commitment, all that is necessary to find the truth is an unconditional commitment, not putting a time upon the commitment, nor a greater value on any other desires or fears. If a person sincerely makes a commitment, he automatically becomes a vector in a sure direction. So you've got some Rose lingo in here. This idea of a vector, which means I think of it as a direction that your energy is pointed in. And if you make a commitment towards, however you want to phrase it, towards discovering the truth, towards being honest with yourself, whatever that commitment is, when you make that commitment, it's like you are building a container for your energy, and it's aimed in a direction. And there's a lot of power to that. I do like this little piece in here of not putting a time upon the commitment. I think that's important. That a life building a life of honesty is not about, well, I'll do this for a couple of years and then I'll do the rest of the things that are of interest to me. And then the piece of nor a greater value on any other desires or fears. So I wanted to explore that last piece. I've been talking for much longer than I would normally talk, and now I want to throw an exercise back at you all, and hopefully get you a little more involved. And that's an exercise about desires, fears, motivations, why we do what we do. And it ties in with commitment. I think commitment should be obvious. It's a very practical thing about trying to achieve whatever it may be that you want to achieve in life. I think one of the reasons that commitment falters is because of conflict. And one type of conflict that puts pressure on the commitments that we make is the conflict between I want versus I have to or I should. And so these are just some very simple examples comparing wants and have tos. So, for example, I want to take a walk. However, I have to clean the kitchen. I have to clean the house. I want to go on a retreat, but I should spend more time with my family. I want to take a vacation, but I really should or have to save my money for an emergency. I want to meditate. I got a work deadline, and I gotta meet this work deadline. These are the little things that come up on a daily basis between our commitments, our wants, and the things that we are labeling, thinking of as have to and shoulds. And there's a more elegant way, I think, to approach this or to examine these conflicts that I believe will help us keep our commitments. And this came out of this book called Nonviolent Communication, which I had heard of for years. I've heard the phrase nonviolent communication, but I never read the book, and I just recently started reading it. And there's a lot of great material in it. It's not what I would call a spiritual book, in that it's not talking about enlightenment, but believe me, it is talking about truth, and it is talking about honesty, and it is talking about working with other people. And in that sense, it's a powerful book. And in it, it had this idea of practice cultivating the awareness of the energy behind our actions. I think this is a powerful practice. And what it looks like is this, that for each thing that we think of as I have to or I should, try going through the exercise of replacing it with I choose to because I want. I choose to X because I want Y. For example, I have to work late. And this one comes up for me all the time. And this is the way I phrase it in my head. I have to work late. Or this is what I say to my wife. I have to work late. Well, when I open that up into and think about it, well, one possibility to rephrasing that is I choose to work late because I want to be recognized for my hard work. I want to earn more money. And money helps me feel secure. So you can see that when you open that phrase, I have to, which is completely powerless. I have no power. I can't do anything. I'm just stuck. There's a conflict. You open that up into I choose to. Well, now I have some power because I can see my motivations. I can see why this energy is going in a direction, and perhaps now I can change it if I choose to, or I can just recognize it for what it is. So what I would like for us to do is just do just making a note for myself. Let me stop sharing this screen. There we go. Okay. So what I would like for us to do is to do a little exercise. I think I'll just pair people up. So we'll break out into just a small group. And in the chat bar right now, I'm just typing in what I just had on the screen. This idea of I have to. And what I want you all to do is to find one or two I have to's in your life and try converting that to I choose to because. And the because is the tough part, obviously. I choose to, well, I'll phrase it a little better. I choose to because I want whatever. So I just typed that in the chat. So I have to try converting that to I choose to because I want. Now, I'm pairing you up because that may be hard. And hopefully you can find something that is fresh for you in terms of the have to, meaning something that just happened in the past day or couple of days, or something that comes up for you in your life repeatedly. For example, if you're trying to establish a practice, establish a habit, think about something along those lines and see if you can ferret out what's the want behind it, what's the energy behind that. And you can dialogue with your partner if you're having trouble with that, and they can help you by asking questions or by throwing out possibilities, and see if you can convert a couple of these have tos to choose tos in your life. I think that's it. Hopefully that is you can understand that reasonably well. If you don't, you're welcome to throw something in the chat right now. If you have a question. I see Lenny threw in a contribution. Thanks, Lenny. Well, I will go ahead right now and set up the breakout room. I'm just going to put 10 minutes. So yeah, you got like 5 minutes each to focus. And you might want to take a minute or two just quietly. I'll let you and your partner figure out how you want to do that. You want to take a minute or two quietly and think before you start sharing with each other. That might be a good idea.
Shawn, there are a lot of statements in the chat box, but there is a question here from John who said, could you expand on what exactly commitment is?
What exactly commitment is? commitment is nothing more than, it's fundamentally doing what you say that you are going to do. Probably the simplest way to think about it. Doing what you say you're going to do. Okay, I got it set for 10 minutes. I've got everybody. I'm going to hit the open all the rooms. All right, we've got one question. How can individuals in a group help one another to honor the commitment? Are there any practical steps that you would recommend group members to take in order to maintain the integrity of the group? It's an awesome, very practical question. If you had asked me that 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have told you, well, I mean, you should ridicule the person who is not keeping their commitment and, you know, tell them how bad they are for not keeping their commitment. But I suppose I have learned over the years that that's actually not the best way to, for example, maintain the integrity of the group. I would really, the exercise that we just did, to me, is one way of approaching that with someone and trying to help the person understand the different energies at play in terms of the commitment that they made. What's the want behind the initial commitment, and in a very practical, you know, find the practical examples. Don't let your the person in your group help them be specific. So much is lost in vagueness. If I come to you and I say, I just couldn't, I really wanted to meditate every day for 15 minutes. I just can't. And that's that kind of just vague, I can't keep the commitment. I just don't know what to do. That's incredibly vague, and vagueness is our enemy. If you can help the person get specific and explore, what's an example? When did that happen? Tell me what happened. Tell me what you were thinking. Tell me, did you sit down to meditate? How long did you actually sit? What were the thoughts that came up as you were sitting? If you get into the specifics, you will be able to help them tease apart the dynamic, what may be the conflict, the tension between two opposing wants. Help them discover those and see what's really there. So, of course, to maintain the integrity of the group, right, they have to be willing to go through that process with you. But hopefully, since most of these groups are supposedly based on self-inquiry and group inquiry, it's kind of a fundamental assumption, is that we're all willing to honestly, to the best of our ability, look within ourselves and help one another to do that. Are we just talking about commitments to practices? No, I mean, that's probably the easiest way to think about it. But it's a commitment. You could make a commitment that I am going to, of course, this is probably a practice too, right? I was going to say I'm going to commit to being self-honest. I'm going to commit to not rationalizing. I'm going to commit to whatever. I'm going to commit to trying to think of a good practical example in regards to honesty. I'm going to commit to, right at the end of each day, I'm going to, if I were making a commitment to being more honest, how would that look? That's great. What does it actually mean? How am I going to implement that? So that's kind of a big commitment. I'm going to commit to being more honest. How am I going to keep that commitment, right? I mean, what am I actually going to do? So I guess that's where practices come in. So you can have a commitment to the truth, or a commitment to finding enlightenment, But that commitment is made up of many smaller commitments that are part of it. So it's not just about practices, but practices are kind of fundamental. I hope that if that didn't clarify, please ask again, and perhaps I can clarify more. Rose spoke about meditation. He spoke of dealing with traumas in the past. Am I correct? You're correct in that the meditation pamphlet talks about meditating on past traumas, I think is the way that he phrased it. That's there's a lot to that, and I don't think we really have time to go into that. I would read the pamphlet, number one, to see exactly what he said. He talked about not reliving the traumas, but he talked about meditating on them and thinking about them and thinking about the dynamics that cause the traumas, what really happened. To me, it was looking at the stories that we tell about things that happened in the past and seeing how true they really are. I think that's all the questions that we've got. Well, in case you missed it, Lenny's quote, my 2 cents, commitment. We remain on our committed path in the face of death and do not blink. Right on, right? I guess that, yeah, it's a lot of feeling in that. A lot of feeling in what Lenny was saying. Is there an indicator of the ratio between intensity of meditation and duration of meditation? An indicator of the ratio, meaning that if we are being very intense, that we could do 5 minutes rather than an hour of so-so meditation. I'm not sure, Patrick, if I've got that entirely clear. If you want to unmute and just ask me, he says yes. Okay. Huh. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've always thought of meditation is really, like Eckhart Tolle talks about the mouse, right, or the cat waiting at the mouse hole. And meditation is, in a sense, it's this waiting, and all it is a moment of revelation. So there can be that intensity of we're, in a sense, swept up in our meditation, right? And we enter a different state, or something changes, and in a moment we receive the value of many hours of meditation in a moment. So certainly, but if what you're saying is that if I sit down and I have the attitude, I'm just going to grit my teeth and I'm just going to focus as hard as I possibly can for the next 5 minutes, is that better than easing my way into it and ramping up? I don't know. I think there's some individuality to that. I think that there could be a lot of value in intensely focusing for short periods of time, but you got to be careful that you don't stress the system in a negative way, if you will, right? There's a way to be focused that's not hurting you or harming you. I know that's kind of vague, but you can almost feel it sometimes when yeah, it's like you're doing harm to yourself in a way in your intensity. And there's other times that you're in a intense groove, but it's good. It's productive. Let's see. Ricky said Rose was giving that way of meditation. Oh, he's making a comment. Rose was giving that way of meditation on traumas or your past life events, as opposed to falling more asleep with auto suggestion hypnosis. Yeah, he definitely. Thanks, Ricky. He was definitely looking at an active meditation. And in that sense, I think definitely in the meditation pamphlet, when Rose is talking about meditation, sometimes he's really talking about directed thinking, active thinking, and he's not talking about trying to blank the mind or something along those lines. But of course, he does talk about as another step, another stage of meditation going within.